good to be together this morning. I invite you to turn in the Gospel of Matthew chapter 21. Matthew chapter 21, and just read the opening verses of this text. This is where Jesus does everything possible to really remove all doubt, if there ever was much, as to who he thought he was, who he claimed to be, that he did come to seize all of the prophecies and all the claims that he was the king, the Messiah, the ruler of all the world, and sought for people to bow in submission to him and follow him. And he comes in a very pronounced fashion, a very obvious fashion, letting people know exactly what he thought. And he comes in a kind of kingly fashion. They are right in the center of Jerusalem, where most people thought and anticipated that the king would set up his earthly kingdom. And of course, we recognize that we were a little misled by that, that its reign is far greater than any physical borders. It's all over the hearts of sinful mankind. Wherever there's an individual who recognizes that they're sinful and seek to be absolved and seek to be recreated in God's image, that's where Jesus seeks to reign and rule. And he is a great king, and he shows in this text really a way in which he rules, that we are blessed to have him rule this way, that would have been very interesting and very unconventional for what most people expected of a king to do. And we'll look at that and talk about that here this morning. But I want to read the text in Matthew chapter 21, beginning in verse 1. It says, "When they had approached Jerusalem and had come to Bethphage at the Mount of Olives, then Jesus sent 2 disciples, saying to them, 'Go into the village opposite you, and immediately you will find a donkey tied there, and a colt with her. Untie them and bring them to me. If anyone says anything to you, you shall say, the Lord has need of them, and immediately he will send them.' This took place to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet. Say to the daughter of Zion, behold, your king is coming to you, gentle and mounted on a donkey, even on a colt, the foal of a beast of burden." The disciples went and did just as Jesus had instructed them, and brought the donkey and the colt, and laid their coats on them. And he sat on the coats. Most of the crowd spread their coats in the road, and others were cutting branches from the trees and spreading them in the road. The crowds going ahead of him and those who followed were shouting, "Hosanna to the Son of David. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna in the highest." When he had entered Jerusalem, all the city was stirred, saying, "Who is this?" And the crowds were saying, "This is the prophet, Jesus from Nazareth in Galilee." I want to just take 3 simple points from the text that indicate the way in which Jesus seeks to be our king, and ways in which we're blessed that he presents himself that way. One of the first points that comes up is this word, gentle. Notice there was a key way in which Jesus would pronounce how he would rule over the rebellious, sinful hearts of sinners in need of coming back to God. And very interesting, because most people would expect a king who has all authority, who has the ability to command and to rule however he sees fit, to almost exercise some ability of force, especially when we're dealing with the rebelliousness of individuals who are against the king. Would almost expect an individual to almost raise up their fist and show their might and demonstrate how no one should even dare even think about standing in opposition to someone as mighty and as powerful as them. But there's a very interesting, vivid picture showing that Jesus would be in total contrast of that. Hence the word, he came in gentleness. And one of the key pictures we see that illustrates this is the animal that he's sitting on. In another text in Mark, if you would turn over to the Gospel of Mark, Mark brings a little added detail about this colt that he was going to be riding upon. There was a donkey and a colt. And he was laying his people's coats upon them, and he sat upon them. And notice it says in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 11, verse 1, it says, as they approached Jerusalem at Bethphage and Bethany, near the Mount of Olives, he sent 2 of his disciples and said to them, go into the village opposite you, and immediately as you enter it, you will find a colt there. Notice, a colt in which no one has ever sat. This is an untamed, this is a wild animal that no one has ever been able to get under control. Animal like that would be very quick to buck or quick to, demonstrate that it wasn't ready for anybody to yield their leadership over it. And yet as soon as Jesus sat upon it, this animal submissively allows Jesus to have total control. And the key is, it submitted not to the power of Jesus, and though he could have by force demanded that this animal submit. You realize who it is who's sitting upon you, right? No, it says it actually was in gentleness. This wild, untamed beast responded to the gentleness of Jesus and submissively allows him to lead it, to take ownership of it, to show it, I'm going to lead you and you're going to follow me, or you're going to submit to me. Whenever I think about this key element of Jesus, the gentleness of Jesus as opposed to that forcefulness that maybe one might expect a king to have, and Jesus didn't have that. He had gentleness. I think about my grandfather, Bob Bills, and my loose teeth that I would always go to him for. I was terrified of the idea of having my teeth pulled, even though the idea of maybe putting it under my pillow, getting some extra dollars for it was enticing. But the idea that it just wouldn't fall right out. So my mind, I don't know what, my teeth just kind of hung there, and you have to just kind of just wiggle it to get it out there. And I just could not bear the thought of that. Of course, anybody who shows a little bit of squeamishness about that, you get sisters. They like to torment you. Oh, Dan, I know a good way we can get that. Just take a piece of floss, tie one end of your teeth. I got one tied to this door here. We're just going to slam the door, should not come, right? I was just, I don't know if I'm ready for that. I'm fainting at the idea of it. Or maybe just, don't worry, Dan, just close your eyes, just twist that thing and yank it out, it'll be out before you know it. The idea that sometimes we like to handle things by taking things by the head or taking force. Just don't bother. Just let me take care of it. Let me just yank it out. Let me rip it out. Let me just solve it quickly. Sometimes when it comes to people who are rebellious, sometimes when it comes to people like this colt, this untamed colt, people can tend to be that way. I'll fix you. Show them on mine, or I'll get lickety spit. We'll get this standard right now. And there is a sense where most people, I think, would expect Jesus, because of his nature, to do that. The key word is gentle. The key word is gentle. That's what made this wild animal submit. And I always remember my grandfather had some way about him, and I don't know what it was, but I remember the first time he made me trust him, and I remember he pulled me into, it was in the Southeast Church of Christ, at the church building where I grew up, and he took me to one of the side classrooms. He said, Daniel, just sit still. He said, I'm not going to hurt you. Everything's going to be fine. That was my grandfather. I said, okay, I trust you. I'll never forget the first time he put his finger in my mouth. I closed my eyes and said, Daniel, it's out. I said, what? Did you do anything? It was sitting there right in his hand. There was my tooth. There was a little blood on it. I didn't even feel a thing. And my grandfather became the man that I would go to anytime I wanted to get my teeth pulled out of my mouth to make sure I could get that money under a quarter of my pillow. Because I trusted that he was always going to have that gentleness. There's a way that I trusted that. I wasn't about to go to my sister's room. She said, I got plenty of ways to get that tooth out. No, thank you. Jesus is demonstrating that that's what he's capable of doing, and that's how he wants and prefers to treat us. So amazing. There is a passage that talks about this over in the book of Zephaniah. In the book of Zephaniah, read that passage with me. Zephaniah chapter 3. Zephaniah chapter 3 is a beautiful verse in verse 17. In verse 17 it says, notice, the Lord your God is in your midst, and he is a victorious warrior. But we see the kind of attitude this victorious warrior is and how he wins over the rebellious hearts of men who he seeks to rule over. And it says that he has the ability to quiet people with his love. It's like my grandfather in that gentle way kind of won me over and allowed me to trust that he wasn't going to hurt me. He was going to take out that element that needed removed, right? And Jesus sees us in that way, like that wild colt. We're wild. People are wild. They're untamed. They're rebellious. They're living all kinds of ways. And nobody can seem to tame them. No one can seem to subdue them at times. And yet Jesus shows, of all people, if we would just bring people to the gentle, persuasive way, Jesus rules with his love. He gains people's trust, and he allows people to allow him in their lives. And notice what it says here. That's exactly what he does in Zephaniah chapter 3. Notice verse 17. He is a victorious warrior. He will exult over you with joy. He will be quiet in his love. He will rejoice over you with shouts of joy. I will gather those who grieve about the appointed feast that came from you. O Zion, the reproach of exile is a burden on them. Behold, I'm going to deal at that time with all your oppressors. I will save the lame and gather the outcast. And I will turn their shame into praise and renown in all the earth. Just as Jesus tamed the wild colt, Jesus wants to tame rebellious hearts. He wants to do that, and he can. But he's not going to do it with an iron fist. He could. No, he's going to quiet them with his love. He's going to win them over. In fact, remember what it says in Matthew chapter 11. He says this very thing. He says, come unto me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. How are they going to come to him? Here's Jesus, the epitome of all righteousness. And they're sinners, often people who hate anything to do with submission, or hate anything to do with humility, hate anything to do with spirituality, hate anything to do with service, kindness. They're selfish people, wild, rebellious people. These are the people Jesus is speaking to. Wild, rebellious, untamed hearts that Jesus says, if you would just come to me, I have the ability to tame you. In Matthew chapter 11, he says how he's going to do it. Almost pleading with them. It's just as my grandfather did. He said, I'm not going to tear that thing out. I'm not going to cause you harm. I'm going to gently get this thing out. This is what he says in Matthew chapter 11. Verse 28, come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. Notice how he's going to do it. I am gentle and humble in heart. In other words, as opposed to all the other rabbinical teachers who had the tendency to teach the law with that iron fist. We're going to show these sinners how they need to shape up. Jesus knew. That's not how I do it. And that's not how you do it. I'm going to win them over quietly with a steady love. a submissive heart, a humble heart, letting them know that they can trust me. That's what he came. That's how he came into Jerusalem as a king, but one who was going to lead in gentleness. Turn over to another passage in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 12. Matthew, chapter 12, a beautiful passage again, demonstrating how only Jesus demonstrated how he has the ability to do this. And I love this picture. Matthew, chapter 12. Matthew, chapter 12, beginning in verse 18. He says, "Behold, my servant whom I have chosen, my beloved, in whom my soul is well pleased. I will put my spirit upon him, and he shall proclaim justice to the Gentiles. He will not quarrel, nor cry out, nor will anyone hear his voice in the streets." He's not going to come in and cause a ruckus. He's not going to kind of kick the doors open and say, okay, now we're going to settle things right and for all. That's not how he's going to do it. So we are tempted to want to do it that way. By all means, we are tempted to want to do it that way. I'll show you. Right? Notice, it says, Jesus, I'm going to put my spirit upon him, and he won't act that way. He's not going to do it that way. How is he going to do it? In verse 20, a battered reed he will not break off, and a smoldering wick he will not put out until he leads justice to victory. That is, patiently, persuasively, lovingly, tenderly calling the sinner, just as he did as he sat upon this untamed wild colt. That's the picture. That's how he wants to do it. That's what he's capable of doing. He wants us to at least trust him, to draw near to him, knowing that he will not be overbearing with us. He will not be overpowering with us. And that's a beautiful picture, a bruised reed. Most people, when they looked at those reeds, as fragile as they could be, especially if they had any bruised or imperfections in them, they would look at it and say, well, this isn't good for anything. They'd break it and they'd burn it. And the picture is that Jesus, when he sees broken people, Jesus seeing untamed, wild people, they're wild because they're broken. They're wild because they're bruised. They're wild because they have hurts. They're wild because they have pains in their past and in their lives. And Jesus, understanding these things, Jesus wants to bring them to them. No, I understand. Of all, I'm willing to listen to you, to have a dialogue with you. Remember Isaiah chapter 1, come let us reason together. Let's sit down and talk about this. I'm not just going to be immediately dismissive of your situation. It's the way he was with all sinners. And again, that's what drove the Jews crazy. Saying, we're ready to just do away with the whole Gentile race, not Jesus. That's who he was willing to sit upon. Come to me. And you Jews as well, if you have any faith in me at all, come to me. I'm not going to wipe away a sinful group of people. I'm going to reach out to them, and I'm going to bring them gently, reasonably, patiently to win them over. And Jesus wants to do that. How is he able to do that? Maybe why is he doing that? Why does he do it that way? Well, notice another statement. Mounted on a donkey, even on a colt, the foal of a beast of burden, speaks about his humility. Jesus goes into the central capital of what they believe would be the epitome of all reign and rule and authority. Jesus, who had the ability, all the credentials, but saying, look, I'm humble. I didn't come demanding people fall down and just labor all over me, even though I deserve that. But notice how many passages Jesus corrects the mindset of why he came. And he came with a servant's attitude. He came with a humble heart, wanting to get dirty, to get in the grime, talk to sinners, rub elbows with them. And that's what people couldn't understand. Why are you mingling with sinners? Why are you around them? Why do they feel so comfortable in your presence? Because, as he said, he's going to win them over. And the way he wins them over is he's so humble. He's so humble, it's almost disarming to people who feel unworthy to be in his presence. And it was the other way around. Picture, perfect example, when he meets John the Baptist. And what did he do? John, will you baptize me? John's like, what are you talking about? I am not worthy to untie the thong of your sandal. And you want me to baptize you? And people wonder, what does that mean? When he says, this is fitting to fulfill all righteousness. It's to set things in their proper order. Jesus, who has the ability to be demanding, to be domineering, is not. He is humble. So much so that one who doesn't need to be baptized would submit himself to the baptism of John, simply to demonstrate that he is a submissive, humble leader who does not put himself above those who he wants to serve. Is that amazing? But listen to the various passages that lead us there. Turn to Matthew chapter 20. Matthew chapter 20. In verse 26, he has this wonderful conversation with his disciples, correcting the mindset. In Matthew chapter 20 and verse 26, back up to verse 24. Matthew chapter 20, verse 24. And hearing this, the 10 became indignant with the two brothers. But Jesus called them to himself and said, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great men exercise authority over them. It is not this way among you, but whoever wishes to become great among you shall be your servant. And whoever wishes to be first among you shall be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many. It's kind of like, you ever maybe been in a situation, maybe you're not expecting company, maybe it's been kind of hectic, maybe throughout the week, and things have happened, and just the house is just maybe not the most tidiest of situation, maybe that you might want it to be if you're having company over. And someone unexpectedly comes to the door, and you're apologetically, please understand, I feel embarrassed here. We have that sense, right? We don't feel comfortable with someone maybe coming in and just making an immediate assessment of what we've been doing with ourselves through the week, and just things have happened, and just we all have been there. Jesus sees the messes of our lives. And we sometimes have that sense that we want to keep him at a distance because we feel like I couldn't bear the thought if you came in and you saw this mess. And what you might think of me. And what judgments you might make of me. Because I know what I should be following you. I should be honoring you with my life, and I should be making you the epitome of my life. But there's so many things here that are kind of a mess and unattended to. There's a great picture of how Jesus feels about that in John chapter 13. And the reason is because he is so humble. Jesus is the humble one who doesn't mind the mess. He doesn't mind stepping in and looking at all the disarray in our lives because he came with a servant's heart, ready to dress himself and put on the rubber gloves, put on the hairnet. In fact, he put on the towel. He said, that's why I came. I came so that I might get my hands dirty, and I want you to let me clean up the mess. I don't mind. I don't judge. I just want you to trust that that's what I came here to do. That's the picture in John chapter 13 of the disciples were arguing amongst themselves, didn't even realize how foolish they sounded, arguing about who's the most important, who's the greatest, who's going to sit on the right hand of Jesus? And then Jesus realizing, what a mess. Got a mess in your hearts. Look at you guys. Oh, just, man, you can't wait to step over one another, downplay each other. And he didn't mind getting dirty, because he knew that's what he came to do, is to show people, I want to clean this up. And so he did. In John chapter 13 and verse 1, it says, now before the feast of the Passover, Jesus, knowing that his hour had come, he would depart of this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world. He loved them to the end. During supper, the devil, having already put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come forth from God and was going back to God. You might assume someone who thinks all these things, in other words, might be tempted to say, I totally don't deserve to be a bunch of these misfits. I came from God. This is what's going through his head. I'm perfect. And I'm going back to this perfected place in glory. And yet all these, you know what these thoughts did? They resonated with the very identity of someone who is that heavenly, who is that good. And the next logical assumption was, well, let's serve. Let's help. Let's try to rearrange some things. Let's get them right on a better track. So it says in verse 4, he got up from supper, laid aside his garments, and taking a towel, he girded himself. And then he poured water into the basin and began to wash the disciples' feet. Now he was doing much more than just washing their feet here. He was cleansing their mind. He saw the mess, the disorder of how they thought about themselves and how they thought about their service to God, and it was a mess. And Jesus didn't pull rank. Who do you think you are? Let me help you. Peter, remember, you should not be washing my feet. Peter, if you don't let me, you can have no part of it. We have to trust that that's what he's coming to do. We have to let our guard down, and that's what he wants. Hence, this is why he comes into Jerusalem this way, mounted on a donkey, on the foal of a beast of burden, showing his utter humility. I do not think of myself as too good to be in the messes of your hearts. I want you to let me in. I'm humble. I'm gentle. Let me put this yoke on you. Let me clean up some messes. If you trust me, and let me do it. And the third thing we see from this text is that he did. He came with an agenda. He came with a willingness to act. There was something he was going to do. It says, here is your king coming to you. He does anticipate. He wants all of us to stand at attention. He wants us to face him. But here's where it gets difficult. So many of us, even when we accept that Jesus has the ability to tame, so many of us, when we come to the ability to accept that Jesus wants to clean, that Jesus wants to serve, sometimes we have a hard time accepting the fact that anything can change. Sometimes we have a hard time accepting the fact that anything can be different. Our past haunts us, our mistakes cling to us. But you know what's amazing about this? Jesus wants us to let him in our lives so he can actually do some erasing. He wants to make all things new and actually forgive and cover our sinful past in such a way almost as if, well, that doesn't even exist anymore. A fresh start. And that's the only way truly we can let him humbly come and clean and help us. And this we accept the fact that that's what he came to do, to make all things new. In Revelation chapter 21, verse 5, that's the beautiful passage. Behold, I make all things new. In the book of Hebrews, he reminds us that he lives to make intercession for us. That's what he came to do, to intercede for us on our behalf. Turn over to Hebrews chapter 7. Hebrews chapter 7 and verse 24. It says, but Jesus, on the other hand, because it continues forever, holds his priesthood permanently, therefore he is able also to save forever those who draw near to God through him, since he always lives to make intercession for them. He comes not to make war. He comes to make peace. He comes to make peace by offering his blood as that humble servant willing to cleanse. And the cleansing agent is the blood he shed from his own body. If that's not a humble servant, I'm at a loss for any other accurate description. That's what he wanted to do. He wants us to face the fact he's coming to us. And he's coming to us not to aggressively throw us down and put his foot on us neck and say, surrender. To show us what real, tender, gentle, good love is all about. And to show us he wants to bring us into that tender love, to shape us and renew us and make us new again the way God intended. And he's willing to erase the past mistakes and continually make intercession and make it possible for us to continue to have access to that when we fall and stumble in our journey. So if anyone is with us who recognizes that maybe it is intimidating when we think about the authority, the kingship of Jesus, perhaps it's intimidating, humbling to think about standing before a just and holy God. Don't ever forget this. The image that Jesus wants you to have in your mind is he is the least threatening individual he wants you to imagine. He can tame you, and he wants to tame you, but he's going to do it by an amazing love that's unlike anyone else, and a righteousness that he's able to yield and show through justice and that his word reveals, and to cleanse us, make us holy, and ultimately forgive and wipe away all of our sins and transgressions. If anyone here, perhaps like that untamed colt, feels a restless rebelliousness in your life, I want you to realize that Jesus is able to tame, and Jesus is able to renew, and Jesus is able to forgive. If only you humble yourself and accept him on his terms, confessing that Jesus is the Christ, repenting of sin, and being baptized in water forgiveness. If you need to do those things, won't you come and obey the gospel while we stand and sing this song of encouragement together?